Today, I have with me Brandon Faust on the show, and I think you're really going to glean a lot of value from this show. We're going to be talking about mold, its effects, and what you can do about it. And this is something that I have seen in many of the listeners. And working with women over the years in health, nutrition, and fitness coaching, I've run across quite a few clients that have suffered from mold exposure. So, this is going to be a extremely relevant topic for our health. Let me tell you a little bit about Brandon. Brandon Faust is the visionary owner and founder of Mold Solutions, an industry leading indoor air quality company specializing in top tier remediation, atomized sanitation, hopefully I said that right, and duct cleaning services. Driven by a personal journey rooted in his commitment to health and healing, Brandon's dedication stems from witnessing his own family's struggle with unexplained chronic illnesses. With a heartfelt mission to address these widespread health concerns, he has become a beacon of hope for many individuals in search of answers. In a short span of just 1.5 years, Brandon propelled Mold Solutions from a dynamic startup to a thriving enterprise, boasting a high skilled team of 15 dedicated staff members. Brandon's exceptional accomplishments and unwavering commitment have garnered well deserved recognition. And in 2021, he was honored with the prestigious Inc. 5000 award and propelled the company to an impressive number 377 ranking on the coveted Inc. 5000 list. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate all those things, accolades that were just talked about. And it's true. Mold Solutions is 2 years old, and then my prior company where I had a partnership, we did get that company specifically to the number 377 on the Inc. 5000 list. But we also had in that company, for me, the health aspect of mold has always been the first priority. And the main reason being is because my son got sick from mold. So there was a divergence in regards to emphasis where that company was starting to go more in the direction of insurance. And to me, I never wanted to be beholden to what insurance would pay for or not pay for. I wanted to be beholden to what the client needed to make sure that their home was as safe and healthy as possible. So
Mm,
that kind of gives you a little bit of the background in regards to because I've been now with dealing with mold for almost 7 years. So there's
wow.
been a lot of exposure, not just to moldy homes, but a lot of people that are dealing with mold toxicity and the impact that it has on their life. And in some cases, it can be debilitating, for that individual. And of course, when one person is being debilitated, it can have a huge impact on the family as a whole.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I've seen it, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, and as we spoke off camera, that I have seen it in clients, and some individuals seem to be very vulnerable to this. Now, was it your son's story of becoming sick with mold? Was that how you got into the industry? Was that the driver for you?
It was more the driver to go in the direction of an emphasis on health
Mm,
because prior to, I had gotten into it mainly because it seemed like a good opportunity. A friend of mine had approached me on helping him with his mold company, that he was going to take over. He was basically asked to take over the Tampa branch. There was two locations, one in Los Angeles, one in Tampa. So he was going to take it over. It had nobody working for the company. There was a website and a van and a concept of doing demolition-free mold remediation using
hmm
a fogging system, which later on, especially due to my own health and what occurred with me in 2019, where I got sick from mold in a pretty intense way, where I found that the dry fogging wasn't enough. Like it did one certain slice of the pie, if you will. It was basically handling one portion of what needed to be handled. But when you're dealing with mold, it is so important that you actually find the root cause, that you find what's actually creating the moldy situation in the first place, which is always going to be water. It's going to be some sort of a water source, and then locating the actual colonized mold, and then removing that. And then after you've done the micro cleaning, that would include like vacuuming using special vacuums that remove very minute particles, and then doing the wipe down, a very thorough wipe down, then doing a fogging. Then it's a powerful tool in the entire process. But it really is one slice of the pie. So when, because I had fogged my room and thought I was fine, the air sample showed that I was fine, but I was sick for six months plus, and I thought it might have been mold exposure based on the symptoms. I ended up doing a mycotoxin test personally for in the body, and myco is the Greek word for fungus. So the mycotoxin test shows the type of poisonous substances that you have in your body that comes from particular species of mold. And I was high in probably, I think it was 5 different mycotoxins, and one of them I was off the charts. Like
Um,
high was 5 to 50, and I was at like 1,200 and I think
wow.
12. I just recently looked at it, so I was really really high on this particular mycotoxin. And it wasn't until I my AC overflowed and I was removing the flooring in my house because it flooded about 50% of my home. So I was removing all the flooring and I got to the master bedroom, popped the baseboard, and there was a toxic mold behind the baseboard, and then about 2 feet up and 3/4 of the master bedroom. So that was kind of my really, that was the huge moment for me where I told my partners, like, look, I'm out. If we don't transition and pivot to doing traditional remediation, that I'm not going to continue to promote it or market it or sell it. Like, this has always been about health, and if we're not achieving that for our clients, then we're doing them a disservice. So to backtrack, the thing that happened with my son, fortunately, we pretty much did the right thing, even though we weren't really, we thought that the fogging of the house would be sufficient. What we did at that moment was we fixed the leak. We did remove the contaminated material because I found a shelf that was basically the backside of it had 2 feet of mold, in each direction, vertically, and two
Mhm.
feet of mold horizontally. And that shelving system was in the same room where the furnace or the air handler was located, the central heating and air, where it was pulling all the air to basically supply to basically taking that air and then supply it with cold. It was in that same room. That return was in that same room, and I was blowing moldy air all throughout the house, moldy and toxic air. So fortunately, fixed the leak, removed the contaminated material, cleaned it up, and then we sanitized the house. And then the next day, my son slept an hour longer and he had no trouble breathing at all. Where prior to that, 3 days in a row, he was having almost like an asthma attack. He was waking up struggling to breathe at a month old. So that was terrifying for my wife and I. And we literally were ready to take him to the emergency room. That was it. She was like, I'm taking him to the emergency room. I said, okay, let me just, I have all this training certification that I've just learned, let me just see if it's potentially environmental, and just turn this one shelving system. And it was clear as day that this wasn't helping matters. And then the real moment was when the next day he slept an hour longer and had no trouble breathing at all. It was almost like a switch. So that was, where I realized, oh my goodness, this is actually really important. This what we're doing here, because I thought about what would occur, what I would have done had I not known about this, and
Right.
how many doctors I would have been taking him to trying to figure it out, and the problem would have remained in the home, and we would have been spinning our wheels trying to figure it out when it was just hidden in our own home, and we didn't know about this leak because it was a pinhole leak that would only go off when the shower was being used. So my mom had come to visit because of the baby. So for the 2 weeks she was there, that's how quickly the mold grew, was within that 2 weeks. and
Wow.
it was poisoning him. So yeah, it
How
was
terrifying.
yeah, it was a
Your
pretty
baby's son. That's terrifying.
yeah.
What should people be looking for if it can develop with just this little pinhole leak? That's really kind of scary. What should people be looking for? Should they be having their homes tested?
Yes, but I think first and foremost, you have a overriding datum, which is a factual datum, which is if you want to keep mold out of your house, you got to keep it clean and dry. If you keep the home clean and dry, you won't have mold. Mold must have a water source in order to form. The problem is when it's a slow leak or you're not seeing the moisture, or in a place like Florida where we're located out of Tampa Bay, there's enough water in the air, there's enough vapor, humidity. The mold is actually getting enough water that's airborne to start growing on surfaces. So, in you can also have like AC malfunction where maybe the AC is too large and it cools off the house too quickly
Mhm.
and it's not pulling enough moisture out of the air because it's like rapid fire dropping of the temperature and it doesn't run long enough and then the moisture stays airborne. Or maybe the HVAC fails, while you're out of town. We see that with the snowbirds a lot, where they are out for, 3 to 4 months or whatever it may be. They come home and literally have mold growing on everything, you know, and I'm talking about mirrors, I'm talking about countertops, tables, shoes, clothes, bedding, linens. It's on everything. And it's just because there is enough moisture that the colonization starts. And then once you get a colony going, that colony, as part of its survival and perpetuation process, shoots off little spores. And those little baby seeds, right, they land somewhere and there's enough nutrients, whether in the material or in the dust, that it now starts hatching, if you will. It starts germinating and spreading its roots, and then it starts replicating. So it starts multiplying extremely rapidly, and that's why it's so important to make sure that your humidity levels, of course, in New Mexico, you may not have to deal with humidity levels over 60 for an extended period of time, but down in the South or in Florida, it's year round 70%, average. So it's a definite situation that we face. And then, of course, one of the things that could contribute to that is lack of ventilation, where the air stay is somewhat stagnant, and then those spores are not getting blown around because it needs time to kind of land and then start spreading its roots. You know,
Right, right. Yeah,
you know.
here in New Mexico, I know we have had issues, not as many, because of course there's the leaks that you don't see, but some individuals here, quite a few actually, still have evaporative cooling. It's been kind of a gradual shift over
Mm,
to AC that's forced air, heat, and AC, but you still have a lot of individuals who have those swamp, we call them swamp coolers,
swamp
and
coolers, of course,
some
yeah.
imagining problems can come with those types of devices.
Of course, anything that's going to add moisture to the environment is something that you really have to be aware of and watch, monitor. So the leaks are a huge portion of it because even in a place like Phoenix, Arizona, they still have mold issues, but usually it's coming from a leak. And let's say you have a temperature differential, similar to like if you took a cup of water, a glass of water, there's no moisture on the glass until you put ice cubes in it. And now all of a sudden the temperature has dropped where droplets will start forming on the outside of that glass, which is when you need the coasters. So imagine that same scenario where the material in your attic or in your closet is dropping to a certain temperature and it's starting to form water droplets and there's condensation occurring. Well, that's enough moisture that could lead to mold. So you have wet molds and you have dry molds. Wet molds are the molds that require at least like 90% moisture content in order for it to grow. And those are considered to be some of your more toxic molds. Like the technical name is Stachybotrys chartum for black mold. So that particular mold, if I'm seeing that on samples, then I know that there's most likely a leak somewhere because it doesn't grow without like a 90% moisture content. Same thing, there's basically like six or so different molds that require that water source in order for them to actually start growing. And then there's dry molds like the aspergillus or penicillin, penicillium, which is where penicillin actually comes from. But those dry molds can start, colonizing or growing with just 60% relative humidity. So those two things are different. Relative humidity is the amount of water droplets in the air compared to the temperature and dew point, and there's a few other factors to kind of reach that algorithm that tells you the relative humidity. And then the wet molds are, they have to have that drip or that water source or a flood or something like that that really kind of keeps that material wet, the moisture content of the material. So that's important data for whenever you're dealing with a remediator or an inspection, understanding that because it tells you what you need to start looking for. And of course, some molds like aspergillus and penicillium, it can grow um, with moisture as well. It can, but the first thing I'm looking for if I see that is humidity levels. And then there's another mold that we see really often here in Florida, which is cladosporium, which has been labeled as like an allergenic mold, but it releases a pretty toxic substance. It releases certain mycotoxins that can definitely cause health issues. And the unfortunate part about that mold is it actually will thrive in a colder environment. So it loves the HVAC system. So once it infests or starts infiltrating the air conditioning system, it now has a distribution center, better than Amazon to basically spread its spores throughout your home and the mycotoxins. So it can lead to entire families being sick for an extended period of time, and they don't know why they are having respiratory issues or coughs or rashes or headaches or joint aches. And sure enough, it's because the HVAC has been infiltrated and is infested with microbial growth or cladosporium.
Wow. So it's surviving in the cold as opposed to that kind of hot, wet environment. We lived in Seattle. It's been a very long time ago, but we lived there for about a year. My husband took a job and then we had to move. And the main reason we moved was I had a mold allergy and we were living in an older home and Seattle is very wet, but it wasn't hot. I mean, I'm wondering as you were speaking if that's a common mold in that environment because we were running our heat and it was rather cool. It was the winter months and raining just nonstop. But I developed a pretty severe allergy to mold.
Of course. I mean, look, any place where it's wet and damp and moist, it's gonna lead to microbial growth. I think the best rule of thumb is that most molds are comfortable in similar temperatures to us, right? So most people are going to enjoy, 85 degrees or 82 degrees. Maybe 85 might even be a little high for some people. 79. But once it starts getting into like the 40-degree range or 45 degrees, most people are not particularly happy without having coats and stuff on.
Mhm.
So that particular mold will accept that condition and actually is fine with it. It will still grow and germinate in those conditions. But that the other thing that mold doesn't like is UV light. It doesn't like sunlight. So in Seattle, where it's a little bit darker and more clouds and stuff
Mhm.
like that, it's going to enjoy that too because it's not getting that direct UV light. But we've heard about of course, any area where there's dampness, there will be microbial growth. And sometimes there is a little bit of a myth that the older homes are worse off than the newer homes for mold exposure, especially in places where they have extended rainy seasons, because sometimes the contractors will leave the material out in the rain. And the younger lumber, the timber itself, it actually mold loves that newer wood because it's more cellulose, whereas the older lumber tends to be tighter and it has tighter rings and it's harder and um, it actually serves as a little bit of a antimicrobial in itself, but when you have this kind of cellulose lumber that's being used that's wet, and then you have sheetrock or drywall being put over that material, you can actually wind up with a lot of mold that is hidden behind walls that the contractor inadvertently um, created because he didn't think that mold was a big issue, or he didn't even know that it was there. Maybe it looks like a white film and it hasn't fully grown. But once it gets closed up and it's in that tight quarters and there's not a lot of ventilation and it stays damp, then it will start growing.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I always had thought older homes, they're going to have a worse problem. So that's really good to know. So if somebody's buying a home, whether it's a new or an older home, what do you recommend? I know that there are inspections that are done, but are those adequate? Should they have an independent, someone like you come in and look at the situation?
I would give that a resounding yes, especially if you're concerned about mold, because the problem is most home inspectors are not licensed or certified to do mold inspections. And there's some states that require that you actually have a certification or a license. And most states actually are going in that direction. But most importantly is actually their experience with mold and knowing what to look for, where to look, because if it's just kind of an add-on service to the home inspection, the unfortunate part is that a client could end up with a false peace of mind, thinking that their home is okay, but it really hasn't been thoroughly inspected. The thing that is not going to be advertised or marketed is that the air sampling that most inspectors are doing is inadequate as a testing modality because it's about 70% inaccurate. So you put a pump out into the middle of the room and you test to see, oh, is there normal fungal ecology, like acceptable levels? Because most areas are going to have a little bit of mold, and that's not a big thing. But there's some molds that set off red flags or alarms, and there's other molds where it's over a certain amount. That's like, okay, that's concerning. But what happens if the mold is not germinating at that moment? What happens if all the spores have fallen to the ground and it hasn't gone through a germinating cycle recently? Now you think it's okay. Not only that, but those air samples are, they're actually, another term for them is a spore trap. So they're only collecting spores. So in my case, with my room, I had done the air sample, thought it was clean, but the main problem is I was not testing for mycotoxins. I was doing an air sample, relying on a spore trap to tell me that there's not a situation. But the thing that actually causes the majority of toxicity issues or illness or physical problems is actually the mycotoxin, which is much smaller, and the air samples pick don't pick it up. So you're looking under a microscope, and if you're getting, hey, you have elevated levels, they're looking at spores. They're not looking at the toxic gas. So one of the datums that I think is vital is understanding the size of mold spores. So the human hair is a 70 microns. That's the width of a human hair. The the normal human eye will stop seeing at 40 microns. You can't see below that usually. It's too tiny. A mold spore is 7 microns. So you can fit 10 mold spores on the tip of a hair. And the mycotoxin that colonized mold releases is zero point 0.1 micron. So it's an ultrafine particle. You're not going to be seeing it. But if you're dealing with people who are sick because of mold, the majority of the sickness is actually caused by the mycotoxin, the poisonous substance or gas, whatever you want to call it, that mold releases to defend its territory. There is some physical reaction that occurs because of spore release, which is usually a histamine release that occurs. Like some people would refer to it as mast cell activation syndrome, or Another one is kind of used in this industry is chronic inflammation response syndrome, where you're taking in a foreign invader, which is the spore, and the body is inhaling this or breathing it in or eating it and swallowing it with the food. And that taking in of that foreign invader, being it the spore or the mycotoxin, but in most cases on the histamine release, it's the spore. The body starts having a reaction where you can wind up with hives, rashes, swelling, like just like when you get bit by a mosquito, or stung by a bee,
Mhm.
it turns red and it starts to swell up. And some people might be allergic to it, and it's going to be far worse for them. Where somebody might just kind of have a natural like reaction, which goes away within 24 hours. So when that's occurring and you're inhaling these multipores, it can be an acute reaction like that, or you can also have long-term reactions that, especially with the people that do not detox, because there's probably about 20 to 25% of the population that does not detox at the same speed or has difficulty detoxing. And for those individuals, their cup, if you will, continues to fill up and it never gets reduced. So that water, if you will, like as an analogy, it fills up and it starts spilling over. And that's really when you have the mess, or it becomes debilitating, because we're constantly exposed to toxins in our environment, whether it's the food that we're eating, the outside air, the medications, the smoking, tobacco, alcohol, whatever the toxins are that we're taking in, environmental toxins like mold, those are all adding to that toxicity level. So if your body doesn't detox and you're kind of in an environment where you are being intoxicated, like I was in my master bedroom, yeah, it was intense. Like I had this pain in my chest that wouldn't go away. I was fatigued. I had a fever every month. I was it was just not pleasant. It was horrible to experience. And within 3 weeks of finding it and remediating my room and removing the toxic mold, the two different molds that were fighting it out in my bedroom, within 3 weeks, all of those symptoms went away. Like the change was dramatic. So now when I start experiencing those types of symptoms, I know that the chances are there's some sort of environmental toxin that I need to locate and remove that. And then obviously there's things that, I work with my health practitioners to stay on a regimen to, detox. Honestly, I do like an ozone sauna, once a week. I'm taking glutathione. I mean, obviously I'm not a doctor. This is just for me, kind of what
Mhm.
I do in certain binders to help remove those toxins from my body.
Yes, very familiar with that process because, as I mentioned, I've had clients go through and work with their practitioner on detox. Something that I've noticed is that the symptoms just seem to range individual to individual. So I know I have just a couple of clients coming to mind right now where they described what they went through. One weight gain that was just
Yep.
could not, because the fat cells are scooping up those toxins to protect us, and that was really a profound symptom for her that took quite a while for her to get through that. It disrupted hormones, so there was
Yep.
that part of it. Another one was more of the fatigue that you described. So why do you think, I know we're not medical doctors, but why do you think there's such a range of symptoms?
I think that, the body has weaknesses already. Like there's exposures
Hmm.
or things that may have happened in the past, but wherever your immune system may be weakness, or maybe you've already had some sort of intolerance built up, you're gonna or where you become sensitive, right? That is going to be the area of weakness because it's working overtime. It's your immune system is constantly fighting this. And it's true. It can be, it's a wide variety, which is a lot of the reasons. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why it goes misdiagnosed or undiagnosed,
Mhm.
because there's so many potential ramifications. I mean, depression is the mental aspect of it. I've seen that a lot. People, there's almost like this darkness that comes with it. I mean, there's a neurodegenerative aspect of it, the mycotoxins. do have a natural affinity to the most fatty part of the body, which for most people is the brain, right? And it actually ends up disrupting the neurotransmissions. And so you have like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and some of these more neurodegenerative type stuff that have been linked to mycotoxins. I actually have a sheet right here in front of me that I just realized I had it here, but it's like the signs and symptoms of mold toxicity. And we have fatigue, weakness, aches, muscle cramps, unusual pain, ice pick pain, headache, light sensitivity, red eyes, blurred vision, tearing, sinus problems, cough, shortness of breath, abdominal pain, diarrhea, joint pain, morning stiffness, memory issues, um, focus and concentration issues, word recollection issues, decreased learning of new knowledge, confusion, disorientation, skin sensitivity, mood swings. That's a big one. Appetite swings, sweats, temperature regulation, excessive thirst, increased urination, static shocks, numbness, tingling, vertigo, metallic taste, tremors, and pans in children. I mean, that's pretty intense, right? So
Very.
that comes from Mosaic DX. So Mosaic is a company that does testing. Is a mycotox profile. So you basically do a urine test and they will tell you the different types of mycotoxins that you have in your body and what's considered acceptable, what's considered high. And but they've done the studies that, unfortunately, a lot of traditional Western medicine is not looking into, and they really should be. When you have the number of ear, nose, and throat doctors that are dealing with different types of allergic reactions, and rather than finding root cause, they're potentially providing a pill or a steroid or an inhaler where that could actually be totally knocked out if they were to find the environmental triggers that are causing it. This is just an example that it's not even mold, but in my office, we had a number of staff that were starting to get like sick and they were getting headaches, and I was walking into the office and I was smelling something and it was this off-putting smell. And and immediately we cleaned the ducts, sanitized the office, and came back the next, after the weekend, but the smell was still there. So it just happened that we had just bought these new containers to store some of the our systems in, and those new containers, once we removed those from the office, all of those smells went away, and the headaches went away, and the reactions went away. So it just goes to show, like, you have to put on your detective hat to figure out what's actually causing the volatile organic compound or the impact that's resulting in the non-optimum physical condition. So when you hire a mold inspector, it's really important, back to that point, that they're not just doing a pump sample, that they know what to look for and where to look. They know the different patterns that different molds have. Like, for example, Chatomium has this signature granular look when it's just starting out. It almost looks like a little mud speck. What does Stachybotrys look like? Wet. What does it look like? Dry. And is it dead now? Should you not worry about it? No, mold doesn't die. It goes dormant. So once it gets more water, it can start growing again, similar to like brown grass. It gets a nice rain, it's green and it starts growing faster. So having an inspector, you want somebody that's going to be doing direct samples on anything that looks concerning. You want him to know where to look. You want him to do, yes, some air samples, but not rely only on air samples. If you have sensitivities, you might want to use a company like Real Time Labs to do mycotoxin testing using the dust that is in their home. Also, there's a test called the dusttest.com. You can order a dust test to see if there's any, mycotoxins in your environment. So I like to recommend, hey, do the mycotoxin test, through mosaicdx.com, do that, and then do, a mycotoxin tests with either real-time labs or the dust test, and let's see some correlation. Let's see if they're matching up. Because if you have trichothecene in your body, and then you have trichothecene, this is the name of a mycotoxin, in your sampling in your home, well, the chances are extremely high that you have a leak that's hidden in your home and there's Stachybotrys behind one of your walls. And now you need to get somebody in there who can do thermal imaging, who can do moisture mapping, who can look to find the actual source which is harboring this hidden mold. And then you would make sure that they follow very specific protocols to clean it up, which would be containment, engineering air controls so that there's a negative air, so that once they are, the spores are being blown outside, not being allowed to cross migrate back into the house. Then they would do precision demolition where they are not just taking a sledgehammer, but they are using almost like a dustless saw to cut out the contaminated material, put it into a bag that is like a construction bag, like a 6 mil sort of construction bag, gooseneck it, tie it down, wrap it with tape so it's not letting the mold get out. Then you would HEPA which is using the HEPA filters, which are phenomenal for making sure that the small particles are removed. And then you would do a full wipe down of the entire room, that entire space. And maybe you might even want to do a HEPA and wipe down of the house, because if the mold has been releasing spores and mycotoxins this entire time and you didn't know about it, those things did not stay just in that area, right? So you would do this, the micro cleaning is what I call it, the HEPA vacuuming and the damp wipe. And then you would do the atomized sanitization or use, so that's where, in my company, that is a bit of a signature touch of, filling the volume of the home with a non-toxic product that will actually break down anything that may be left over, especially if you're doing traditional remediation on one spot. Then you want to address the overall air quality of the entire building envelope. And then, before I do that, the atomized sanitization, I would also recommend doing duct cleaning, because it's going to get into the return, it's going to get into the system, it's going to get into your ducts. So unless they're super infested, then you might want to look at duct replacement. So it's a pretty thorough process, and as you can imagine, it's not inexpensive. But truthfully, at the end of the day, the wealth without health is almost pointless. So you have to make sure that you don't do a process that you think's handling it and it's actually making it worse. Because it's been done by like a handyman or somebody that is not like a health centric remediator that does not follow these best practices and the safest protocols, that now spreads that microbial, the spores and the mycotoxins to the rest of the house. So it really is important that you use guys that know what they're doing.
Yes, I had no idea until you described this whole process, how intricate, how much goes into this to do it correctly. Now, Brandon, and this may sound like a silly question, but do you ever go into a home or into a situation where there's a point of no return, like you can't get rid of the mold?
To be honest with you, I kind of had it as a joke. My wife and I have talked about getting, a promotional item of, a book of matches that says mold solutions on it and says, in case we can't handle it, right? And that's kind of your only
Oh,
your only option, right?
mhm.
But the truth of the matter is, I look, there could be situations where it's so impacted it's not worth it. Like it's just infested everything. Just tear it down.
Mhm.
But the majority of cases are not that. I would say that's like point, 5%. It's like not even 1%. And I tell people all the time, don't run away from a house because of mold. If you have somebody that knows what they're doing, they can, and truthfully, you can find some of your best deals with homes that are infested with mold because people don't want to deal with it. But as long as you know how to do it, and as long as you're thorough, it's just like anything else, right? The more knowledge you have about something, the more you can control that particular subject. So Would I recommend somebody go mess with an electrical panel that doesn't know, it's not an electrician? No, of course not. You know, you want somebody who knows what they're doing, that takes all the proper precautions, because it could be a bad thing. But as long as you have somebody who's competent and follows the procedures, you can get that home free and clear of environmental toxins. That's my perspective on it. Some people might say, no, you need to have a naked start, get away from the house, don't do that. But I have just found that I've never not been able to handle a home. Let's put it that way. And I've, been in over 4,000 homes at this point in time, and we've never not been able to handle a situation.
Are you ever called into like elementary schools or businesses or apartment buildings?
We have been, but the truth of the matter is it's actually not enough, because I think that there's a huge situation in a lot of commercial buildings or governmental buildings or large spaces that are getting continual use, that money is involved because they don't want to have to shut down the facilities to do the appropriate handlings. So in a lot of cases, and not only that, the mold, actually, when they hear mold, they hear liability. Like, you start saying mold and it goes liability, right?
Hmm.
So they don't want to deal with the potential liability, which is kind of ironic, because truthfully, if you don't handle it, is where you really have the liability. But there's a massive situation in universities, in schools, in the dorm rooms. Because if you think about it, anytime you're going to have a lot of people living in a small space, there's more bodies, more moisture, more showers, more humidity, right? Um, and the HVAC may be working overtime. So it's a sort of a perfect storm for creating microbial growth in the HVAC system. And also, these dry molds can start growing under beds, in places, and the kids may not even know what to look for. They may not even say anything about it, or they may have a leak and they may think it's no big deal. And now it's been going for a few months and it's a huge deal, especially if it's like a slow leak. So we have dealt with it. But unfortunately, it's something that the people that are living in those spaces, actually, it's really important that they are aware of it. And parents, with kids in college, if they go to their college dorm and they're getting sick, or they're having migraines, or they're having physical issues that at home they're not having, then they need to hire a competent mold inspector, and not just like a home inspector, but somebody who really knows their stuff. And I would ask that mold inspector, some of the key questions I would be asking them is, what's your understanding of mycotoxins? What would you do if there's mold in the HVAC unit? If you have an inspector that tells you, oh, we don't test mold in the HVAC unit, it's in every HVAC unit, so we don't really test for it. To me, that's red flag. Run away, because that mold that's in that HVAC unit is toxic, and it needs to be properly handled. And in some cases, in Florida in particular, um, you actually cannot go into an HVAC unit unless you're a licensed HVAC contractor. And a licensed HVAC contractor cannot speak to the mold that is growing in the unit. And in actual fact, they'll say, ma'am, we're sorry, but we're not actually allowed to talk to you about what that is, or we're not able to say, because if they don't have a mold license, it's a misdemeanor the first attempt, or the first time, misdemeanor the second time, and a felony the third time if
Wow.
they say that's mold, because they can't say that they handle mold unless they're licensed and certified to address it. So for me, I actually ended up getting both licenses, the HVAC contractor license and the mold license, so that we could do mold remediation on the HVAC unit, because it's so part and parcel to indoor air quality. But I would definitely be asking that mold inspector if they can go into a unit, and if they can't, for whatever reason, go with an HVAC contractor, open it up, inspect the unit, and sample or swab the blower wheel or the coils or the box that sits on top of the air handler
Hmm.
to see if there's colonization in that box. So, so yeah, we do see it in those buildings, and you just have to look, especially if you're working in the building. Like imagine, there's a Best Buy here in Tampa Bay where as soon as you walk in, it's musty, and it's immediately it kind of hits you, right? And if it's musty, it's moldy. That's a stable datum to operate off of. If it's musty, it's moldy. So as soon as I smell that mustiness, I look up. Of course, it's kind of my natural reaction, and it is fully contaminated. The entire trunk line, all the vents, but it's also 40 feet up in the air. So you can imagine it's a huge expense to have to clean that out now that it's gotten going, right? Or either replace all the ducts and replace, the system, or clean it. And cleaning it obviously is more economical. But if it, if you're working in that space, imagine the employees that are in this Best Buy that are 8 hours a day breathing in mold spores and mycotoxins, right? And most of them probably have no idea why they're sick because they're not thinking with mold as the potential issue or the potential cause.
Wow, this has been really eye-opening. I've gotten a lot of value from it. I know the listeners will too. Awareness, I really picked that up from you, is being aware of those symptoms and, seeing a doctor who can test properly, treat properly, and then just aware of your environment and linking the environment with the symptoms. And I think a lot of people walk around, they're sick, they're having symptoms, but they almost get used to feeling bad. You know what I mean? It's
Yes,
like, oh, that's my
absolutely.
allergies, or oh, it's I'm getting older, or whatever it is. And this could be one of the issues or the main issue. So that's been really good information, Brandon. And the work you're doing, I can tell you're very heart centered with it because you care about the health aspect in these families, I'm sure that you're able to help. So it's very important. As we wrap up, I want to be respectful of your time. Was there anything I didn't ask or touch on you'd like the listener to know? And how can listeners learn more and connect with you?
Well, first thing I think that it's great information. I just recently finished this book. It's Mold Free Living: How to Prevent Mold in a Humid Climate. And for a limited amount of time, up until the beginning of the year, we're offering it as a free download. So they can go
Yes.
on to moldebook.com and they can download that and read it. And truthfully, there's 15 key points in that book that give you all kinds of tips and great information about how to prevent mold in the first place and recommendations. So just a lot of free knowledge to help people that, to give them more understanding and control of their environment on this particular topic. And of course, they can always follow us on Instagram, mold.solutions on Instagram. So we're a family owned business. You're going to see probably more than you'll want to see of me, my wife, and my kids. But there's also a lot of tips there as well, but I involve my kids in the business because number one, I want them to know about it. Number two, I want them to feel like they're contributing. And number three, I wouldn't be doing it if it wasn't for my son. I the concept of kind of becoming a mold guy was not something that I was planning on staying in for a long time. It was more like an opportunity at the time. So that business opportunity became more of a passion to really make sure people understood it. So they can connect with us there. Obviously, Facebook, our website is moldsolutions.com. There's a lot of great information there too, and blogs.
Wonderful. I'll make sure that all of this is in the show notes. And once again, just such important work because I've spoken with doctors, which obviously that's after people have gotten sick. It's if we could do some type of prevention or catch things earlier, and that's where you're coming in. And I think it's very important. So thank you, Brandon, for taking time out of your busy schedule and being on the show. Really appreciate you.
Carol, it's been great chatting with you. I hope that we added some value to your listeners' lives. That's what it's all about. Servicing people and
Absolutely.
helping people. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm with you there. And to our listeners, wherever you are in the world, we wish you every blessing. Bye for now.